Canadian military claims it stopped Chinese surveillance in Arctic waters. This is the Great White North Report. I'm in love with the system. Never going home. I'm in love. So yesterday, Canadian military says it has stopped Chinese surveillance in Arctic waters. This is not a surprise to me. Again, China has been declaring itself a near Arctic power, despite the fact that it's so far away from the Arctic. It's not funny. China does not have ready access to the Arctic. Japan has more claims over the Arctic than China does. And it doesn't even declare that. Russia obviously is an Arctic power, as well as the United States and Canada in that area. So this comes after the U.S. shot down suspected Chinese spy balloon that flew through Canadian airspace earlier this month, as well as the other objects that were shot down. There were 3 others a week later. So the Department of National Defense and Canadian Armed Forces are aware of recent efforts by China to conduct surveillance operations in Canadian airspace and waters. Yes, they're conducting that in the Arctic. 2 reasons. A, they want to see if the shipping routes through the Arctic are viable. So they need data on how deep everything is. Where are the best passages? Can container ships go through there? Because it is a cheaper way to get for China to go through the Arctic. Though the choke points through Japan and Korea, it would be easy to choke that trade route, as well as the Bering Strait. So I don't think it's all that feasible, and with the melting ice flows, it kind of makes sense. But it is a cheaper, quicker way to get to the European markets without having to go through a lot of other stuff. The second reason is all the natural resources that exist in the Arctic zone. Canada claims a lot of it, has a large portion of it, but we lack the strength to hold it. And China could easily build up an island there and claim it as its own. So a spokesperson said that the armed forces have tracked and stopped attempts to survey Canadian territory since 2022 under Operation Limpid. To ensure the integrity of operations, we are unable to provide further information at this time. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly said in an interview that China is an increasingly disruptive power, and Canada will work with NORAD to protect North American airspace and take a strong stance on Canada's Arctic sovereignty as more reports of foreign interference emerge. Well, if China wants to play that way, we got to start playing dirty too. We can start by getting all our consular staff out of China, no longer allowing mainland Chinese visas. So that means students, permanent residency, and also closing all the loopholes that allow CCP members to own houses in Canada. $11 billion in Canadian real estate in Canada. Time to start seizing that stuff. We could also close our embassy in Beijing and move it over to Taipei, as well as close down all the consulates that China has in Canada, as well as the Confucius schools. There are ways we can hit back. If they start striking at our trade, then we cut off our trade. Our farmers will find another source to trade with. Or we trade through a middleman, which will up the price for the Chinese. It's time that we start decoupling. China protects its homegrown companies. We should do the same thing. We should have a mirror image policy with them. So when it comes to China, we will challenge China when we ought to, and we will cooperate with them when we need to. That doesn't sound very good. We're in the midst of another Cold War. China needs to be challenged and slapped down. They're nothing but bullies. If you think the United States is a bully, then China is an even bigger bully and will be worse than the United States as a major power. The Canadian military detected Chinese monitoring buoys in the Arctic. Scientific device with potential dual-use capability is almost certainly dropped off by 1 or 2 Chinese icebreakers. So we're talking about a couple of vessels that China has used to circumnavigate the Arctic. Why are they coming in our area? We should be chasing them off. And if they won't listen, board them. Completely ban any Chinese vessels from coming into our Arctic zone. If they want to go to Russia, let them. The United States should also close off its portion of the Bering Strait to Chinese vessels. So the question remains whether these buoys drift into Canadian waters after being deployed in the Arctic Ocean or were deliberately anchored to the seafloor in Canadian territory. I more believe they were deliberately anchored to the seafloor because they've been used to chart the seafloor and monitor salinity levels and ice thickness ahead of other deployments. Again, they're looking for a passage. From an economic point of view, they're looking for the quickest passage through the Northwest Passage to get to Europe. Global warming and the ice melting like it is right now, it's becoming more feasible to use the Northern Passage. The flip side is if something happens, there's not a lot of help come in the winter months. It can be completely shut down for 2 months of the year. And if Chinese vessels start going up there in numbers, then the Chinese will start putting up their own facilities up there. They'll find some kind of rock to sit on. And it'll be harder to dig them out without an international incident. So I would completely ban them from that area and make it clear that they're not welcome. So this is the necessary scientific work that has to be done before you deploy nuclear submarines in the Arctic, and that they could also be tracking American submarines, since we don't have any real submarines ourselves that can stay under there. It's virtually impossible to disentangle scientific and academic work in China from the country's military and government, because the two are side by side. The Chinese government has infiltrated everything within its own society. Everything is weaponized and militarized. The most simplest things. Canada must decide whether to allow Chinese icebreakers through the Northwest Passage, and my answer is no, do not let them. If they try it again, block them. If they continue to do it, fire warning shots, and if they don't listen, board them. Confiscate the vessel. They were warned. And the United States should also close off their part of the Alaskan Bering Strait. Canadian reconsideration of scientific cooperation with the Chinese? No, I wouldn't cooperate with them at all. They will use it against us. So this article goes on to say we need a big review of not only its cooperation with the scientific community, but also how to respond to ostensibly civilian work and scientific work within areas of jurisdiction. The Chinese have no right in the Arctic. The CCP has no right to be in the Arctic zone, especially ours. For many years, the Chinese have tested unmanned drones, underwater drones, and Arctic-specific geospatial technology in the region. Why we let them do this? Because we are weak, and it's time to build up our Arctic forces as well as everywhere else. We have the new naval patrol ships out there, but they're not really capable of any serious defense. So none of this is new. We're just starting to notice it and put it within context of a more confrontational relationship with China. I've actually been saying this for a couple of years now. This is not new to me. The United States changed its law on maritime research in 2020 to require additional authorizations before allowing foreign research activity. We should be doing the same thing, and we should be denying the CCP any such research activity. But any Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think. Should we stop the Chinese from infiltrating our Arctic waters, and should we be putting more assets in that region? Let me know in the comment section. Until next time, this has been the Great White North Report. I'm in love with the